First, first, she was a positivist in that she believed historical reconstruction was possible. Although many think of her as an extreme skeptic, it was because she believed there was a possible reconstruction that she wanted to clear out what she saw as the later accretions and propaganda. Two, she was a comparativist in that she believed there was much benefit to be gained from comparisons with related phenomena in other cultures and periods. You see this in many of her works. The nativist prophets of Iran, for example, she compared with those opposing colonial rule in Polynesia and Africa. Third, she was a structuralist in that she believed in the idea that there are long-term enduring structures that shape civilizations and patterns of behavior. For example, in her book, Nativist Prophets of Iran, she concludes that Iranian religion has certain characteristics, like cyclical time, apocalyptic tendencies, that are essential to it, essential in the sense innate, and that shape each manifestation of it. 4, she was a diffusionist in that she believed and took a strong interest in the spread of ideas and cultural artifacts from one society to another as a major driver of human evolution. For example, in her Roman and Provincial Law book, she starts by talking about how Roman law, many of its foundations are spread to Islamic law. Although this theory seems perhaps obvious, it's often unpopular because many civilizations and ourselves, we don't like the idea that our ideas are just coming from other people's. We like to think of our own importance. So 5, she was an ideologist. I don't mean in the sense of having ideals, but in believing in the power of ideologies to shape our lives. It was also ideologies that interested her most, not materialist ideas. So she wrote about religion, political theory, philosophy, and not really about economics and social history. 6, she was a rationalist in that she believed in using logical arguments and in one's right and duty to be original and free thinking. She disliked what in Islam would be called taqleed, repeating what others have told you. And interesting, when you look at her collection of articles on Iran, it's called The Iranian Reception of Islam, and then with the subtitle, The Non-Traditionalist Strands. Lastly, I want to say she was also a feminist. Not overtly so, but she wanted to encourage female academics in her field, and she tried to highlight female participation in Islamic society where possible. So these are her general approaches, her worldview that shaped how she approached sources and historical writing. I will talk now about the particular aspect of her approach to primary sources. So I actually have good authority for this in that she taught a class to me and my colleagues when I was about 19 years old on my approach, or the right approach to the sources. So this is her words. that I'm going to give you. The prevailing approach when she started to the seerah, to hadith and so on, was to think that there was a kernel of truth. And then there was later additions, miracles, stories, and so on. But there was a kernel of true material that the historian had to find. This is totally wrong, she would say. Quote, she would say, ideological commitment shaped the entire Islamic tradition, not just one or two aspects of it. So you have to be prepared, she says, to critique all parts of the Islamic tradition, not just to look for the bits like miracles that you could put aside. So Patricia gave us a 6-point plan. Number 1, late works cannot be ignored. So in European history, we would ignore late works. There's the idea that early is good and that late, they are influenced too much by the later period. So you want the early works. But for the Islamic tradition, late works can transmit interesting material from a very early period, sometimes which isn't not in earlier works. So you have to take the whole tradition. So number 2, contradictory information cannot be resolved by giving preference to the earlier edition over the later. This would be accepted by many Muslim scholars. So in works of Ikhtilaf al-Hadith, the scholar would look at the two hadiths and think, how have they been transmitted, and look for the better transmitted version. But for Patricia, it's not the isnad that mattered, but the content. So to give an example, Al-Kalbi tells us that Quraysh stopped trading outside Mecca sometime before the rise of Islam, while his son, Ibn al-Kalbi, tells us that on the contrary, they started trading outside Mecca. So number 3, no narrative about the Prophet or the Rashidun or the earliest companions should be treated as necessarily true. And this, I suppose, goes to the heart of her thinking about how to write about early Islam. You see this in the book Meccan Trade. For Patricia, storytellers created and shaped the whole of the narrative about early Islam. So, for example, Muhammad's meeting with the monk Bahira, the aim is to show that holy people of Christianity, also Judaism, recognized Muhammad as a prophet. So the aim of this story is not to say that Muhammad definitely went to Syria and met this person. The aim of the story is to show how Christian holy men recognized Muhammad as a prophet. Opponents of Patricia thought that she was saying all the material, the sources are invented, fabricated. But for her, the point is that those who tell stories about Muhammad, Rashidun and so on, it's not that they invent, but they want to convey a message, to tell how Muhammad is recognized by Christians, holy men, the prophet, or that They want to convey the truth of his message and so on. And the point isn't to tell an exact historical fact. The point is to get an emotion, an idea, to teach, to evoke. For us, we would accept this for things like films and novels. But Patricia would say the same for the Sirah and the Hadith and so on. So the next three of her points are positive in the sense what you should do. So 4, like collect all the variants of an account. If you only have one version of an account, you can't critique it. If you just are told that Quraysh stopped trading before Islam, you believe it. But when you see another account that says they didn't stop trading before Islam, then you start to wonder, which is true? If you have all the versions, you may be able to see which is the true one. Or you may be able to understand what gives rise to all these different accounts. And even if you think all the versions are untrue, for example, Patricia thought so with regard to the traditions about Ilaf Quraysh in her book, Meccan Trade. Even if you think they're untrue, it can give you a bigger context. So the fact that all the sources talk about trade and Quraysh makes you think that trade is important. It is the context, even if we don't know the exact details. So, and 5th point helps to resolve this problem of which account might be more true anyway. And that's to look to other types of information. For example, there is non-Muslim sources. So famously, she used these in her book, Atheism. There is also anthropological information. That is the work of anthropologists in Arabia in the period before modernity, so before machines and so on. And then she argues there is also tribal information. So she distinguished between the religious tradition and the tribal tradition. So the religious tradition is, in Patricia's view, ideologically driven. But the tribal tradition, preserved by individual tribes, she felt was more reliable. So, for example, for the question whether Medina at the time of Muhammad's arrival is united or disunited by feuds, she looked to the tribal tradition, and that tells about different fights between different factions. And she says that's more reliable because it's not so ideologically driven as the religious tradition. And the last point is to check against non-literary materials, so material culture, which means coins, inscriptions, archaeology. So, for example, she used coins to talk about the title Khalifatullah in her book, God's Caliph. And she used archaeological information to talk about the first Qibla direction and agriculture in Muhammad's Hijaz. I will leave you with Patricia's last words in this course, which is whether we ever will know about the reasons for the rise of Islam and Muhammad's preaching remains to be seen. It's not impossible. Personally, I'm quite optimistic, but work in the right spirit has hardly even begun. Thank you.